Hey guys, what's up? Rob here. Today we're going to talk about the spear. Okay, so this is just a stick, essentially. It's a inch and 1/4. Supposed to be used for railings, but I saw it at the hardware store and couldn't resist. It's a little bent. It's not perfectly straight like I would like, but it'll do. Nice 7 foot and an inch or some shit like that. So it'll do good for our discussion today. The spear, the most lauded and dejected weapon, one of the most lauded and dejected weapons of all history. Depending on the culture or time period, regarded as the weapon of the common man, the peasant, and at other times, the pinnacle of weapons for men to fight with. And of course, we can know that in history, the spear is probably the third weapon, and one of the first non-just nature-provided weapons, because the first spears are just going to be obviously sharpened sticks. Sharpen a piece of wood, maybe harden it in a fire, and stab people with it. Works better than trying to bludgeon them with a stick. More effective than throwing a rock. So there you go. And then get some flint, tie it to the end there. This is a little big for tying the flint to, then the point would be way up here, wouldn't be very good. But you could use a tang method, or you split the wood, put your flaked flint blade, and then tie the end with rawhide, keep it nice and tight in the center. Give yourself a nice spear. And then, of course, we move on to bronze, and then into iron. Iron-tipped spears are, pretty early on in the Iron Age, because it doesn't require a whole lot to make if we're making a socket, and then 6 inches of steel. Much shorter than a sword, obviously, much cheaper. So, as I said, we got, just pointed sticks, as is mentioned in the Odyssey, where Odysseus and crew, when captured by the Cyclops, sharpen a stick and fire harden it to blind the poor Cyclops to make good their escape. Of course, we all know the Spartans and the Greek hoplite in general, which were users of spears. It was considered the pinnacle of the man's weapon, spear and shield. It's how men fought. The Greeks regarded swords as secondary weapons, not primary weapons. Of course, if we move to Europe, Norse cultures, more commonly called Viking cultures, spears were also very common, and owning a spear was a sign of a free man. Every free man was allowed to own a spear. Most people didn't own swords. Obviously, since swords are expensive at this time period, there's not a lot made. Your chieftains have swords, but they also have spears because they're nice, cheap to make, easy to use. Of course, as we move into the Middle Ages, knights, of course, adapt from spears to lances, which are still essentially spears, usually longer. And the peasantry, of course, maintain the use of spears because they are cheap, easy to use, and great in formations. If you get a bunch of spears together and you point them out in front of you, people don't want to run at you. Nice to have a hedge of pointy sticks at people. Keeps them at a good distance. Then, of course, the end of the Middle Ages, we move into the Renaissance with pike and shot. So essentially we've moved from mass spearmen to pikemen, of course. Famous examples are, of course, the Swiss pikemen, famous mercenaries, the Landerstück, which are German mercenaries of the same period, also used mini pikemen. And then, as we go, pikemen, we move to pikemen instead of spears. So pike is a really long spear, something akin to the Macedonians using, 12, 13, 15 feet. Not quite that long, but we use pike and shot in the Renaissance for, when they are reloading. When the gunners are reloading, you hide behind nice pointy sticks. Of course, the spear becomes not completely outdated, but for common battlefield use, outdated into the Napoleonic era with the inventions of first the plug bayonet, which is, as it sounds, you stick your knife in the barrel of your gun, and you have essentially a spear. So you turn your rifle into a spear. But then they invented the socket bayonet, which goes around, which is common into the 19th century. Anyone who's seen any Civil War movie ever has seen socket bayonets, used in the Revolution and the Civil War. in the Napoleonic Wars, and beyond. And bayonets are still common to this day. And a bayonet is a knife on the end of your rifle, and it turns your rifle into a spear. So, back into history. So why are spears common? Again, as I've said before, cheap to make, easy to use. Point stick at enemy. You can get anyone to use a spear quickly. And again, they are great in formations. If you need someone to stand somewhere and make sure the enemy doesn't go that way, put a bunch of spearmen there. They don't need to be high quality troops. They don't need to be super well trained, but they work. And depending on the blade you put on the end of your spear, they can be winged blades to reduce penetration. They can be long, thin. They can be leaf-shaped, which was common in the Nordic cultures, very leaf-shaped blade. So a spear can also stab, thrust, and can also cut, because it does have a blade. Of course, variations on the spear appear. There are bills, pikes, halberds, but we can talk about those another time. Spear, for our case, is just a stick with a pointy blade on it. It doesn't have axe heads added to it. It doesn't have any extra additions except for langets or wings to keep it from penetrating. So spears are cheap to make, easy to use. They're great in formations, so you can use them for your low-quality troops. And then another great thing, since we mentioned lances, and a lance is essentially just a spear that a knight uses to charge at other people with, and is generally longer, held crossbody like so, and underarm, couched, so that he can hold it and it doesn't go anywhere, to bring all that force to bear on a tiny little tip. Now, of course, this is 1.25 inches wide, but imagine there's a blade on here and you have a tip about like this. All that force from a, 200-pound man in armor, plus his 500 to 1,000-pound horse, depending on the era and the type of horse being ridden, being concentrated onto that tiny point moving at 20 miles an hour. Not something I want to get hit with. Now, we know that jousts, plate armor, can deflect these things, but oftentimes in many forms of jousts, those are blunted tips, blah, blah, blah. But against someone who's not quite so heavily armored, they're probably going to die. Let's be honest. They're probably dead. So spears are great in that. And again, you can, since we have our nice 7-foot stick here, if I hold it all the way, hand at the end, right here, and I grip, feel feet up, I have very good control. I can't really step back far enough, but I have very good control of the point. I can move it where I want. I can stab over here. I can stab over here. And if I'm using it overhand, underhand, I can still maneuver it. I can cover a wide front with my spear, which is good. And then if they get in close, you can always choke up on your spear some and bring it in close. Use it more kind of as a quarterstaff. So it's even good up close. Of course, not great, not like a knife or something in close, but you don't have to drop your weapon like you would with a pike or some such to, fight in close if the enemy breaks through the wall of your friend's spears. So it's great in close, can keep enemies at a distance, which is good. You want that, especially for lower trained troops. They're not going to be as good, and they'll be very quickly routed in many cases if they get in really hand to hand. Because they're not, maybe they're not well armored, perhaps they're not well disciplined. They just don't want to, you don't want to fight I don't want to fight a knight with a spear unarmored. Are you crazy? No thanks, not something I want to do. So spears, they're great. They're one of mankind's oldest weapons. Obviously we don't have any examples from like the Neolithic periods, because wood obviously doesn't generally survive very well. We have a few examples of wooden objects from antiquity. They are quite rare, mostly clubs from what I've seen. If anyone's seen spears, I'd love to hear about them. So post that stuff in the comments so I can go look at it. I'd love to see it. We have plenty of flint spearheads. They're just longer arrowheads, essentially long, thin, knapped flint for spears. And then, of course, bronze examples, and then we have iron examples. Obvious moving forward in technology. So, in short, the spear, one of the most ubiquitous weapons throughout cultures, history. It's used in almost every culture around the world. The Japanese, of course, samurais are renowned for their use of spear. The yari and various different forms of the spear there. Eastern cultures, in the Middle East, of course, spears, again, they're cheap and easy to equip lots of people with. The Crusaders, of course, used spears. Knights charged with lances. And then, in Europe, they're used pretty much unbroken throughout history, even up into the Napoleonic era. And then, of course, little known fact that in the First World War, British and French cavalry were equipped with lances. Their effectiveness, I'm sure you can guess at. But spear from the ancient times to the 20th century. And of course, there are still ceremonial examples of use of spear-like objects. The Swiss Guard, of course, use halberds, a variation of the spear, I would say. So, and of course, they are just ceremonial, but you can still find them around. So the spear, mankind's one of his first and most used weapons in history, guys. So it's a quick little think about it. We'll talk about halberds and bills probably another time. If you guys got something you want me to talk about, be sure to leave it in the comments below. Tell me what you think. Tell me I'm crazy. If you know some examples of some ancient spears that I can look at, I would be very interested. As always, there are plenty of people out there who know more and who have access to other things, so feel free to let me know. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching, and have a good rest of your day. Cheers, folks!